I used to live in a world of sound. Piano keys beneath my fingertips, the rustle of sheet music, the intake of breath before an audience erupted in applause. Music was my language, my heartbeat, my reason for existing. I was Marie Laurent, the promising young pianist everyone said would make it big. Then came October 15th, 2019, a Tuesday that started like any other and ended with the violent screech of brakes, the sickening crunch of metal, and then nothing. Complete, absolute silence. The doctor spoke to me through written notes those first few weeks. Severe trauma to the auditory nerve, they wrote. Permanent hearing loss. The words looked so clinical on paper, so removed from the devastating reality they described. I spent months in that quiet world, mourning not just what I'd lost, but who I'd been. Friends would visit, their lips moving in conversations I could no longer follow. My boyfriend at the time, David, sweet David, who'd tried so hard, would text me instead of speaking, as if written words could replace the music we'd shared. But you know what nobody tells you about losing your hearing? How incredibly loud silence can be. It was during one of those endless, soundless nights that I first reached for the paints. I don't even remember buying them. They just appeared. In my apartment, probably a well-meaning gift from someone who didn't know what else to offer. The brush felt foreign in my hand, nothing like the familiar weight of piano keys. But when I made that first stroke across the canvas, something inside me cracked open. All the music I could no longer hear, all the melodies trapped in my memory, they poured out through my fingers in streaks of color and light. I painted until my hands were stained with pigment, until my small apartment looked like a rainbow had exploded inside it. For the first time since the accident, I felt alive. The months that followed were a blur of creation and discovery. I learned sign language, not just for communication, but because I found poetry in the movement of hands. I discovered that visual art could be just as expressive as any symphony, that color could convey emotion with more precision than words ever could. My paintings during this period were raw, unfiltered expressions of loss and rebirth. I painted my memories of sound the way morning light looked when filtered through Bach's Goldberg variations, the color of laughter, the texture of silence itself. Each canvas became a piece of my soul, translated into a language everyone could understand. My friend Sarah, who'd stuck with me through everything, was the first to suggest I show my work. Marie, she signed one afternoon, paint still wet on my latest piece. People need to see this. This is ... this is profound. I laughed a sound I couldn't hear, but could feel vibrating in my chest. Who's going to want to see paintings by a deaf woman who doesn't know the first thing about being an artist? But Sarah was persistent. She helped me research galleries, draft submission letters, navigate the art world that seemed so foreign to someone who'd spent her life in concert halls. After months of rejections, we finally found a small gallery willing to take a chance on an unknown artist. The Meridian Gallery wasn't prestigious, but it was mine. My first solo exhibition, Echoes of Silence. The night of my opening, I stood in the gallery wearing my best dress, a deep blue that reminded me of the color of Chopin's Nocturnes. My hands shook as I watched people filter in, their faces animated with conversations I couldn't hear, but could read in their expressions. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a painting I titled Fractured Symphony, a self-portrait that showed my face split between light and shadow, with musical notes dissolving into abstract shapes. It was the most vulnerable thing I'd ever created, a visual representation of my journey from sound to silence to something new entirely. People seemed moved by the work. I watched them point, nod, even tear up at some pieces. For the first time since the accident, I felt like I was truly communicating again, like I had found my voice in a new language. And then she walked in. I noticed her immediately, not just because she was striking, with her sharp cheekbones and ink-black hair, but because of the way the room seemed to shift around her, conversations paused, people moved aside. There was an energy about her that felt dangerous, electric. Sarah appeared at my elbow, sighing frantically. "Do you know who that is?" "That's Olivia Parker, the art critic. She's brutal, Marie. She's destroyed careers with a single review." I watched this Olivia Parker move through the gallery like a predator, her dark eyes assessing each piece with clinical precision. She paused at a painting of mine that depicted sound waves crashing like ocean waves against a shore. I saw her lips curve into what might have been a smile, but it felt more like a sneer. When she reached Fractured Symphony, she stopped, tilted her head, studied it with an intensity that made my stomach clench, and then, turning to the person beside her, she said something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read her lips well enough by then. Sentimental, predictable, like a child's cry for attention. The comment hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flame with embarrassment and anger. Here I was, pouring my heart onto canvas, sharing my most vulnerable moments with strangers. And this woman, this critic who'd never lost anything, who'd probably never struggled for anything, dismissed it like it was nothing. But I was wrong about her, wasn't I? About the struggling part, at least. I just didn't know it yet. The review appeared in the Art Quarterly 3 days later. Sarah brought it to me, her face grave as she placed the magazine on my kitchen table. Lawrence's latest exhibition, Echoes of Silence, promises an intimate look at the artist's journey from musician to visual artist following her hearing loss. Unfortunately, what it delivers is a collection of works that mistake personal trauma for artistic depth. The centerpiece, Fractured Symphony, is particularly disappointing, a heavy-handed metaphor that tells rather than shows, demanding sympathy rather than earning admiration. Laurence's technical skill is adequate, but her work lacks the sophistication and nuance that elevates art beyond mere therapeutic exercise. This is self-indulgence masquerading as artistry, a deafening silence indeed. I read it 3 times, each pass making my hands shake more violently. The words felt like physical wounds, each sentence a deliberate cut designed to cause maximum damage. But it was the final phrase that destroyed me, a deafening silence indeed. She had taken my disability and turned it into a punchline. That night, I stood in my studio surrounded by canvases that suddenly felt worthless. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just a woman playing at being an artist, mistaking my pain for profundity. Maybe I should have stayed in my quiet world, stopped, pretending I had anything important to say. But then I looked at Fractured Symphony again, really looked at it, and I saw something Olivia Parker had missed or chosen to ignore. This wasn't just about my hearing loss. This was about transformation, about finding beauty in brokenness, about the courage it takes to reinvent yourself when life tears you apart. I thought about all the other artists who'd been dismissed, all the voices that had been silenced by critics who were too afraid to see beyond their own limited perspectives. And I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to confront her. The Art Quarterly offices were everything I'd imagined: sleek, intimidating, filled with the kind of people who looked like they'd been born holding wine glasses and discussing the problematic nature of contemporary expression. I dressed carefully for this confrontation, choosing a red dress that felt like armor, like war paint. The receptionist tried to tell me Ms. Parker was too busy for unscheduled visitors, but I'd learned something about persistence during my months of gallery rejections. I waited in that lobby for 3 hours, my interpreter beside me, until finally, the door to Olivia's office opened. She looked exactly as I'd remembered, sharp, elegant, utterly self-possessed. When she saw me, her expression shifted from annoyance to curiosity. "Ms. Laurent," she said, her voice carrying the kind of cultured accent that spoke of private schools and art history degrees. "I assume you're here about the review." My interpreter began to speak, but I held up a hand. I'd been practicing my speech for days, and I was going to deliver it myself in my own voice. "You don't get to dismiss my pain like it's some cheap trick," I said, my words coming out perhaps too loud, too forceful, but I didn't care. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything and rebuild from nothing." Olivia's perfectly composed expression faltered for just a moment. "Ms. Laurent, I understand you're upset, but criticism is criticism." I cut her off. "That wasn't criticism. That was cruelty. You took my story, my struggle, and you turned it into a joke." For the first time, I saw something crack in her facade. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Please sit." "Let me explain." I remained standing. "Explain what?" "How you make a living tearing down people who have the courage to create. How you hide behind your education and your connections to justify destroying dreams. You think I don't know about losing everything?" The words came out sharp, almost desperate. "You think I don't know what it's like to be broken?" The question hung in the air between us. For a moment, the polished critic disappeared, and I saw something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. "Show me," I said, the words coming out softer than I'd intended. What happened next wasn't what I'd expected. Olivia didn't throw me out or call security. Instead, she did something that seemed completely out of character. She started talking. Really talking. "I wanted to be an artist once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sculpture. I had this ridiculous dream of creating these massive installations that would change how people saw the world. I spent 4 years at art school, pouring everything into my work." She moved to the window, her back to me. "My final thesis project was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. I wanted to create something that explored the relationship between creation and destruction, beauty and decay. It was ... it was everything to me." I found myself leaning forward, drawn in despite my anger. The critique was public. Department heads, visiting artists, other students. I stood there for an hour while they dissected every choice I'd made, every decision, every dream I poured into that work. And when they were finished, the consensus was clear. I had technical skill, but no vision, no soul, no real understanding of what art could be. She turned back to me, and I saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, so I became a critic instead. If I couldn't create, at least I could understand creation. At least I could recognize real art when I saw it. "And my work?" I asked. "What did you really see when you looked at it?" Olivia was quiet for a long moment. "I saw myself," she said finally. "I saw someone pouring their heart onto canvas, someone brave enough to share their pain with the world. And it terrified me because it was everything I'd wanted to be and never could." The admission hung between us like a bridge. Neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. "Show me," she said, echoing my earlier words. "Show me your world. Help me understand what I missed." I should have said no. I should have taken her confession as vindication and left. But there was something in her eyes, a hunger, a longing, that I recognized because I felt it myself in those dark months after the accident. "Come to my studio," I said, "tomorrow evening. If you really want to understand." She nodded, and I left her office feeling strangely hollow. I'd gone there looking for a fight and found something much more complicated instead. The next evening, Olivia arrived at my studio exactly on time, looking decidedly out of place in her perfectly tailored coat among my chaos of canvases and paint-stained easels. She moved through the space carefully, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. "It's not what I expected," she said, and I realized she was signing as well as speaking. When she saw my surprised expression, she flushed slightly. I learned some sign language after our meeting. I wanted to understand." That small gesture did something to my heart that I wasn't prepared for. I showed her my process, how I translated emotion into color, how I used texture to convey what words couldn't express. I painted while she watched, my hands moving across. The canvas in a dance she seemed to find mesmerizing. "How do you know when it's finished?" she asked, her voice soft in the dim light of my studio. "I don't," I admitted. "Sometimes I think a piece is done, and then I wake up the next morning and see something else it needs. Art isn't about perfection, it's about truth." "Truth," she repeated as if tasting the word. I've spent so long looking for technical perfection that I forgot about truth. We really talked for hours. About art, about loss, about the courage it takes to create something from nothing. Olivia told me about her gambling addiction, the debts that had driven her to accept questionable assignments, the way she'd hardened herself against feeling anything too deeply. "I became a critic because it was safer," she said. "You can't fail at creating if you never try to create." "But you can fail at living," I replied. As the night wore on, something shifted between us. The air grew thick with possibility, with the kind of tension that comes from two people recognizing something profound in each other. When I turned from the easel to find her standing close behind me, paint on her fingers from touching a still wet canvas, I felt my breath catch. "Marie," she said, her voice barely a whisper. And then she kissed me. I should tell you about that kiss, about the way it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Olivia tasted like wine and secrets, like all the words she'd held back for years. Her hands, so precise when she wrote her reviews, trembled as they traced my face. "I've been thinking about you," she confessed against my lips, "ever since that night in the gallery. I couldn't stop thinking about your paintings, about the way you transform pain into beauty. We made love there in my studio, surrounded by canvases that seemed to watch us with painted eyes." She was gentle at first, tentative, as if afraid she might break something precious, but I was done being fragile. I was done being careful. "I want to feel everything," I told her, and she understood. What followed was weeks of stolen moments, of Olivia appearing at my door with takeout and staying until dawn. She would sit in my studio while I painted, offering insights that were nothing like her published reviews. These were thoughtful, encouraging, full of genuine appreciation for what I was trying to accomplish. "You see color differently," she told me one night, her fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder, not just visually, but emotionally. "You paint the way music sounds." "How do you know what my music sounded like?" "I researched you," she admitted. "I found recordings of your piano performances online. You were extraordinary, Marie. The way you interpreted Chopin, the emotion you brought to Debussy, it's all there in your paintings now, translated into a new language." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I miss it sometimes, the music." "But you haven't lost it," she said, pulling me closer. "You've just found a new way to share it with the world." Of course, it couldn't last. Nothing that beautiful ever does, at least not without a fight. The rumors started small whispers in the art world about Olivia Parker's sudden change in perspective, about the way she'd begun writing more positive reviews. Then someone saw us together at a gallery opening, her hand on my back as she introduced me to collectors and curators. "Conflict of interest," the headlines read. "Critics' credibility questioned after relationship revealed." But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when Olivia's past caught up with her in the form of Marcus Webb, a man who spoke in threats and collected debts with interest. "You owe me $50,000, he told her, cornering us outside a restaurant one evening. "And I'm tired of waiting." I watched the color drain from Olivia's face as she realized her carefully constructed world was crumbling. The gambling addiction she'd mentioned in passing was far worse than she'd let on. The debts were real and dangerous. "I can get you," The money, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. How? By writing pretty reviews for your girlfriend's paintings? Marcus laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. I have a better idea, about art, about what's valuable. I need someone to help me authenticate some pieces, maybe adjust some provenance documents. Easy money. You're talking about fraud, Olivia said. I'm talking about survival. That night, Olivia broke down in my arms. I've ruined everything, she sobbed. My career, my reputation, and now I'm going to ruin you too. Let me help, I said. We'll figure something out. How? With what money? You're just starting to sell your work, and I'm about to be exposed as a fraud. Even if I wanted to help Marcus, I won't compromise my integrity any further. But I had an idea. A dangerous, possibly stupid idea that might save us both. A reality show? Olivia stared at me as if I'd suggested we rob a bank. Think about it, I said, pacing my studio with nervous energy. We're already a story, the critic and the artist, the unlikely romance, the redemption arc. Someone will pay for that story. I'd been researching production companies, looking for anyone who might be interested in our situation. The world was obsessed with reality television, with real people in extraordinary circumstances. We were perfect for it. People love mess, I continued. They love watching successful people fall and ordinary people rise. We give them both. And you think this will solve our problems? I think it gives us a chance. The money from the show could pay off your debts, give us time to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, it helps people understand that art isn't about perfection, it's about truth. Olivia was quiet for a long time. You're asking me to expose my worst moments to the world. I'm asking you to trust me. The way I trusted you when I let you into my studio, into my life. 3 weeks later, we were sitting across from a producer named Janet Mills, who looked like she'd been born in a boardroom and raised on drama. Brush with fate, she said, reading from our proposal. The story of a deaf artist and the critic who discovered her. Romance, redemption, and real-time creation. I love it. The contract was more invasive than I'd expected. Cameras in our homes, microphones during private moments, access to our most vulnerable interactions. But the money was real, and more. Importantly, it was immediate. This could make or break both of your careers, Janet warned us. Reality television is unforgiving. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Olivia, saw the fear and hope warring in her eyes. We're prepared. I said, I was wrong. Living on television is nothing like living in real life. Every emotion becomes performance. Every private moment becomes content. The cameras followed us everywhere, to galleries, to my studio, to therapy sessions where I talked about my hearing. Loss and Olivia discussed her gambling addiction. Tell us about the night you first kissed, the producer prompted during one of our interview sessions. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. These weren't just private memories anymore, they were episodes, story arcs, dramatic moments designed to keep viewers engaged. But there were unexpected benefits, too. The exposure brought new collectors to my work, gallery owners who wanted to represent the deaf artists from the reality show. My paintings were selling faster than I could create them, and for the first time since the accident, I felt financially secure. Olivia's situation was more complicated. Her participation in the show had effectively ended her career as a traditional critic. No publication wanted to hire someone who'd become part of the story rather than just reporting it. But she was discovering new possibilities, writing longer pieces about art and artists, exploring the human stories behind the canvas. I'm learning to see art the way you do, she told me one evening as we sat in my studio, painting side by side. Not just as an object to be analyzed, but as a conversation between the artist and the world. The cameras captured that moment, and it became one of the most watched segments of the show. Viewers responded to the vulnerability, to the way we were learning to love each other despite our flaws and fears. But not everyone was pleased with our growing success. Marcus Webb didn't disappear just because we were on television. If anything, our public profile made him more dangerous. He knew we had money now, knew we were building something valuable. 50,000 has become 75. He told Olivia during a phone call the cameras weren't supposed to capture. Interest and inconvenience fees. Pay up, or I start talking to reporters about your creative accounting and some of your earlier reviews. I watched Olivia's face crumble as she realized the trap she was in. Even if we paid him, there was no guarantee he wouldn't come back for more. Men like Marcus didn't just collect debts, they collected people. We need to tell the producers, I said. They need to know what's happening and have them turn it into a storyline, make our crisis into entertainment. They're already doing that, I pointed out. At least this way we control the narrative. The meeting with Janet Mills was tense. She listened to our story with the calculating expression of someone trying to figure out how to turn trauma into television gold. "This is perfect," she said. "Finally, a mysterious figure from the past, threatening to destroy everything you've built. We can make this the climax of the season." "This isn't a plot point," Olivia said angrily. "This is my life." "Honey, your life became a plot point the moment you signed that contract. But don't worry, we'll protect you. We have security, lawyers, resources you can't imagine. Let us handle Marcus Webb." I should have been relieved, but something about Janet's enthusiasm made me uneasy. In her eyes, we weren't people anymore. We were characters in a story she was writing out despite everything. I had a second exhibition to prepare for. Unsilenced was supposed to be my declaration of independence, my proof that I'd evolved beyond the wounded artist Olivia had first encountered. The paintings were different this time, bolder, more confident, filled with the complexity of my relationship with Olivia and the growth I'd experienced over the past year. The centerpiece was a diptych called "The Critic and the Artist," showing two figures that seemed to be dancing, fighting, and embracing all at once. "It's us," Olivia said when she saw it, her voice filled with wonder. "But it's also everyone who's ever struggled to connect, to understand each other." The gallery was packed on opening night. The reality show had brought attention I'd never expected. And the crowd included not just art lovers, but fans of the show, journalists, and curious onlookers. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the cameras. But then I saw Olivia, standing near the entrance in a stunning black dress, and everything else faded away. She was holding a microphone, preparing to make a speech I'd begged her not to give. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the crowded gallery. "A year ago, I wrote a review that I thought was professionally honest, but was actually personally cruel. I dismissed Marie Laurence's work because it reminded me of my own failures, my own fears about vulnerability and truth." The crowd grew quiet, sensing the importance of the moment. I spent my career believing that criticism was about finding flaws, about maintaining distance and objectivity. But Marie taught me that the best criticism, like the best art, comes from engagement, from empathy, from the courage to feel deeply. She turned to look at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. I've spent my life tearing art apart because I was too afraid to create my own. But Marie she taught me that love isn't a critique. It's a masterpiece. The words hung in the air like a painting still wet with emotion. Then Olivia did something that made my heart stop. She began to sign, her hands moving through the visual language I'd taught her. "I love you," she signed, and the gesture was somehow more intimate than any words could have been. The crowd erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was already moving toward her, my own hands forming the response that came from my heart. "I love you too." The reality show ended its run that spring, but our story was just beginning. The money from the show had allowed us to pay off Olivia's debts and start fresh. Marcus Webb, faced with the reality of our lawyers and the publicity surrounding our situation, had disappeared back into whatever shadow he'd emerged from. Olivia started a new publication, an online magazine called Resonance, that focused on the stories behind the art, the human connections that make creativity possible. Her writing had evolved beyond traditional criticism into something more like poetry, more like the art she'd always wanted to create. "I'm not reviewing anymore," she told me one evening as we worked side by side in the studio I'd expanded with my growing success, and discovering my own work had evolved too. The paintings I created now were informed by everything I'd learned about love, about loss, about the courage it takes to be vulnerable in public. I was still the deaf artist, but I was also the woman who'd found her voice, who'd learned that silence could be a choice rather than a limitation. We traveled together, now visiting galleries and meeting artists whose stories Olivia wanted to tell. In Rome, we discovered a sculptor who created massive installations from recycled materials. In Tokyo, we met a painter who used traditional techniques to explore contemporary themes. Each journey added new colors to our understanding of what art could be. "Do you ever miss it?" Olivia asked me one night as we stood on the balcony of our hotel in Paris, looking out over the city lights. "The music, I mean, the way things used to be." I considered the question carefully. "I miss the sound of applause," I admitted, "but I don't miss the person I was before." She was good at one thing, but she wasn't brave. She wasn't willing to risk everything for love. And now I know that some things are worth the risk. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. 2 years after that first exhibition, I found myself standing in the same gallery where Olivia had first dismissed my work. But this time, I wasn't alone. This time, I was curating an exhibition called Voices in the Dark, a collection of work by artists who'd overcome significant challenges to create something meaningful. There was a veteran who'd lost both arms in combat and learned to paint with his feet. A woman who'd survived a stroke and discovered sculpture as a form of physical therapy. A teenager who'd aged out of foster care and found solace in photography. Each artist had a story, a journey that had led them to this moment. "This is what I was trying to do all along," I told Olivia as we walked through the gallery the night before the opening. "Not just create art, but create connection. Show people that everyone has a story worth telling." She squeezed my hand. "You've done more than that," she said. "You've shown them that stories can be told in different languages, through different senses, in ways they never imagined." The opening was different from my first exhibition, less anxious, more confident. I moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd learned to trust her own voice, who discovered that vulnerability was actually a form of strength. But the real moment came when I saw a young woman standing in front of one of my newer paintings, tears streaming down her face. She was signing to her companion, and I caught fragments of their conversation. "It's exactly how I feel," she was saying. "Like someone finally understands." I approached them, introducing myself through sign language. The young woman, Sarah, not my Sarah, but another one, had lost her hearing in a diving accident 6 months earlier. She was struggling with depression, with the feeling that her life was over. "I saw your story on the reality show," she told me. It made me think maybe there was hope. "There's always hope," I replied, "but sometimes we have to create it ourselves." We talked for an hour about art and loss and the different ways people learn to communicate. When she left, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that silence doesn't have to be empty." Later that evening, as Olivia and I cleaned up after the reception, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us here. The accident that had stolen my hearing had also given me something precious, the ability to see the world in a new way, to find beauty in unexpected places. What are you thinking about? Olivia asked, noticing my contemplative mood. About how strange life is, I said. How the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing that ever happened to me. Meeting me, you mean? She teased, meeting you, finding my voice. Learning that love isn't about fixing each other, it's about witnessing each other's growth. She pulled me into her arms and we swayed together in the empty gallery, surrounded by art that told stories of survival and transformation. So what's next? She asked. I looked around at the paintings, at the evidence of human resilience and creativity that filled the space. More stories, I said. More art, more ways to help people understand that being different isn't the same as being broken. And us, I repeated, tasting the word. We keep learning, we keep growing. We keep proving that the most beautiful things in life often come from the most unexpected places. If you're waiting for me to tell you that everything was perfect, after that Olivia and I lived happily ever after without any more challenges, I'm going to disappoint you. Real life doesn't work that way. Real love doesn't work that way. We still fight sometimes. Olivia still struggles with her need for control, and I still struggle with my need for independence. We've learned to navigate the art world together, but we're still learning to navigate each other. What we have now is something more valuable than perfection. We have truth. We have two people who've seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay. We have a love that's been tested by public scrutiny, financial pressure, and the constant challenge of two strong personalities trying to build something together. 6 months ago, Olivia proposed to me in my studio, surrounded by paintings that told the story of our journey. She didn't get down on one knee instead. She picked up a brush and painted a single word across a blank canvas. Forever? I picked up my own brush and painted my answer. Yes. We're planning a wedding for next spring. And yes, we're thinking about having it filmed. Not for reality television this time, but for ourselves. For the artists and dreamers who followed our story and found hope in it, because that's what this has all been about, hasn't it? Not the exhibitions or the reviews or the reality show. Fame. It's been about connection, about finding ways to reach across the spaces between us and touch something real. I still paint every day. My studio is fuller now, Messier, filled with the evidence of a life fully lived. Olivia writes at a desk in the corner, surrounded by art books and half-finished articles. Sometimes she looks up from her work and signs "I love you" across the room, and I sign it back. We're working on a book together, the story of our relationship, but also a guide for other artists who face criticism or setbacks. We want to show them what I learned that night in the gallery when Olivia first dismissed my work, that the people who hurt us often do. So because they're hurting themselves, and that sometimes the most devastating encounters can become the most transformative. The hearing aids I wear now allow me to catch fragments of sound, not enough to hear music the way I used to, but enough to hear Olivia's voice when she whispers my name in the morning. It's a different kind of music, quieter but no less beautiful. Yesterday, a young artist contacted me through social media. She's lost her sight gradually over the past year, and she's afraid her career is over. She wanted to know if I thought she could transition to sculpture, if touch could replace sight the way sight had replaced sound for me. Yes, I told her. But more than that, you can create something entirely new. Something that only you can. Create because of your unique perspective, not despite it. That's the message I want to leave you with tonight. Not that everything happens for a reason. I don't believe that. Bad things happen to good people, and sometimes there's no grand purpose behind the pain. But I do believe that we have the Power to create meaning from our experiences, to transform our wounds into something beautiful. My hearing loss didn't make me a better artist. My relationship with Olivia didn't fix all my problems. But both experiences taught me something crucial, that art isn't about perfection and neither is love. They're both about showing up, about being present, about having the courage to be vulnerable in front of others. When I look at my latest painting, a piece I'm calling The Sound of Color, I see everything I've learned distilled into brushstrokes and pigment. It's abstract, flowing, filled with the kind of movement I used to associate with music. But it's also uniquely mine, something I could never have created when I was the person I was before. Olivia says it's my masterpiece, but I disagree. My masterpiece isn't a painting. It's the life I've built, the love I've found, the way I've learned to transform silence into something that speaks to people's hearts. And you know what? It's still being created. Every day, with every choice I make, every risk I take, every moment of connection I share with another human being. The canvas of my life isn't finished. It's just getting more interesting. So if you're out there struggling with your own silence, your own loss, your own fear of not being enough, let me tell you something. You are enough. Your story matters. Your voice, whatever form it takes, deserves to be heard. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you'll find someone who not only hears your voice, but helps you make it stronger, clearer, more beautiful than you ever imagined it could be. Someone who sees your scars not as flaws to be hidden, but as proof of your survival, your strength, your capacity for transformation. That's what Olivia gave me. That's what I hope I gave her in return. And that's what I hope you'll find too. Not perfection, but connection. Not a life without challenges, but a life worth living anyway. The silence between us doesn't have to be empty. It can be filled with possibility, with potential, with the kind of love that makes everything else worth fighting for. This is Marie Laurent, and this is my story. But more than that, it's our story, mine and Olivia's, yes, but also yours. The story of anyone who's ever felt broken and found a way to create something beautiful from the pieces. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for reminding me that every voice matters, even when it speaks in whispers, even when it speaks in silence, even when it speaks in colors that most people can't see. The canvas continues. The story continues. And somewhere out there, someone is picking up a brush for the first time, or a pen, or a camera, or whatever tool they need to tell their truth. That's the real masterpiece, not any single work of art, but the endless human impulse to create, to connect, to transform. Pain into beauty and silence into song. The rest, as they say, is still being painted.